Got my phone in hand and some seeds to sow. Got backyard gardens playing on my headphones. Got planter open, dragging and dropping, learning how to grow. All the vegetables, 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 all the vegetables. Eat your vegetables.
Well, good morning, gardeners and homesteaders. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. And what a fantastic song that was, wasn't it? Lyrics were just absolutely spectacular. And that was provided by Peter over at the Planter app. And so just remember, as you're listening to this show, that you can get a discount on the Planter app with the link below. So check the link below and get your discount for the Planter app, available on the Google and Apple stores.
Hey, Peter.
There you go, Peter. There's your shout out, one of many. But everybody, there's a lot of things in the garden that happen, and there's a lot of things that we talk about. But one of the subjects that we're really passionate about is we just want you to keep growing in your garden. And not what we were referring to is not just giving up, but we want you to keep literally growing in your garden. Keep the garden growing through the seasons, transitioning over, filling in seasons, keep those areas packed and keep them beautiful. Is that safe to say, Batavia, or am I do you think I'm tripping over here?
I'm hoping you put it on a shirt.
No, that's too long.
I'll wear it.
Here's our new T-shirt with a paragraph on it. I hope you enjoy.
I was at the doctor with my mom, and her primary was back from maternity leave, so we hadn't seen her in months and months. And so she was talking to my mom about diet and eat more vegetables, and my mom's like, that's her thing.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom starts talking about my garden, and I said, this isn't about me, this is about you.
Yeah.
But then the doctor says, wait, does your shirt say gardening shirt? I said, yes, it does. Which is one of my favorite shirts from the shop. I signed an autograph as, Backyard Gardens podcast co-host. And I, showed her where Spotify, she can find the show.
She's like, what's Spotify? Like, here we go. Here we go. Yeah, I think it's somebody in my family still thinks that I have an actual radio show over the air. Like, yes, I do. Turn it into 6:30 a.m. It's like, whatever. I can't explain to you podcast forever.
That's what I kind of tell my mom. Like, if I mention the podcast, I kind of, yeah.
My radio show? Yeah. So, yeah, we want to keep your garden growing. And there's, one specific thing that we really kind of want to hone in on. And, in true Backyard Gardens fashion, we'll probably hone in on that and probably 8 other things at the same time. So it'll be good for everybody. But, it's getting certain plants out of your garden, believe it or not. They just shouldn't linger, like the cranberry said. It's a musical kind of day. Do you have to let it linger? Do you have to? Do you have to? Sorry, I can't get it out of me.
You're so loopy. I've been watching you for 20 minutes, and I'm just like, all right, he's going to calm down. He's going to,
No, man, I drank a bunch of caffeine earlier. I can't help it. I don't drink caffeine, and when I do, it, really affects me. So.
Yeah. So, a part of the continued growing, you can't look forward to the next thing that you're going to grow if you have something that is, for all intents and purposes, dormant in your garden. And that is a hard thing to decide on. Should I give up on this plant? Is it done? Has it served me well? Should I move on or not? And that's what we're going to help you with today.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. But I also think there's the part of knowing when the plant, the life cycle of the plant. You know what I mean? Because when you go through each season, it's really difficult to we talk about transition. So truth moment to the podcast. We always want to talk about transitioning to different seasons because it can be complicated, but it's really hard to kind of come up with those ideas about it, like as a episode centric topic. Don't you think, Batavia?
That's what I said. Booby traps.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's if you understand. As a side note, I had this bed where I had potatoes and there were sunflowers last year, and the sunflower seeds, you can't ever get rid of all of them that drop, that self-sow, and they were coming up, and I was outside and I was thinking to myself, a part of the gift that some of us have as we continue in our gardening is you are able to recognize things as they pop up. Right.
Yeah.
So I know that that's not a potato that's coming up. I know that that's a sunflower, and sunflowers, their roots go deep, and I want to get that out of there. I don't want it to impede on my potatoes. But I bring that up because it's understanding kind of from the beginning to the end, as you note, the life cycle of a plant. Right. So that includes not only when it's actually first emerging, what it looks like at various stages, including the production, and when it is about done producing for you, including what, kind of your maybe even annual sickness. You talk a lot about this when it comes to a particular vegetable plant in your garden. Like, you can predict when this thing is going to start to get sick and make the decision on when to pull it. Right. That's empowering too.
Yeah, it is empowering. And it's one of those things, when I started gardening, I was under the impression that plants just continue, like you planted a plant and it would continue to give you produce the whole time. And once I finally learned that, like, hey, that's not really the case, then I could kind of, the garden season sped up in a sense. I could get more out and more in. And when I say more in, I mean I can get a plant out and a plant in a fraction of the time that I could before, because I really started to learn the difference. And you brought up potatoes. Remind me after the question of the day, either between you or Leonard, to remind me to tell you that my story about my potatoes. It's a very good life lesson for the gardener. But I don't want to take up our time now with that. So after the question of the day, I'll try and remember.
Got it.
But you can look at, and the thing is so tricky too, is it comes down to different varieties of certain vegetables, tomatoes, indeterminate, determinants. You've got, just across the board. And one plant, and I have to just talk about my research I've done on it, because I haven't physically seen it too much, but like corn will give you a definite, like, you can look at the plant and it'll tell you where it is in its development based on the amount of leaves it has, the height it's growing, stuff like that. And so learning all of these things will help propel you into another direction as far as getting these things out. So I think, and some plants, if you leave them in the garden, man, they can just do a lot more damage than you would think. Yeah. There's like multiple reasons to pull a plant out of the garden.
Yeah. I think corn is a good example because it is, outside of variety, maybe dictating how many ears it's going to put on, how tall it's going to get. Everything else is kind of the telltale sign. Like, you're going to follow the same path when it comes to the corn development. And I'm speaking very generally here. And with that in mind, you have like an end point that is pretty clear, right? Yeah. As far as I know, tell me if you've read something different. You harvest, let's say that you luck out in the variety you have produces 2 ears per stalk, and you've pulled both of those ears off. That's it. There's nothing more. There's no side shoots of corn, right? Our favorite. So that's a good example.
I hate side shoots.
Yeah. There's so few times, if any, that I've seen side shoots that are really worth your time. And actually, it's actually super connected to what we're talking about. So let's go back to side shoots. So corn, like, you're leaving it there for, decoration, if nothing else. You've harvested that corn. Pull it out of your garden, get the next thing in. And the cool thing about something like corn is there's some level of like mid-growing season. I'm combining all of the actual seasons, but mid-growing season, that thing is going to produce. You still, in most cases, have time to put something else in. And that's how we want you to keep growing.
you keep bringing up vegetables that are triggering my to-do list. We need to put corn in our shop at some point in the future. Some variety of corn. I'm gonna grow popcorn. I got to get some popcorn seeds like now. My onions are coming out, everybody, and I'm putting in corn behind it. So there you go. That's my plan. Popcorn. But yeah, and for me personally, my corn, like after I harvest it, if I get a harvest this year, I'm going to take all the stalks. My goal is this fall to have so many bundles of corn stalks in my yard that people are going to think I'm an absolute freak. So that's my goal. Save money that way. It's a crop that gives both ways. But in all seriousness, I mean, squash is a really good example of something like this. I mean, how many times do you hear gardeners, and this may sound like I'm talking bad, but I'm really not, complain about squash and squash bugs and vine borers and even like powdery mildew and stuff like that. And for good reason, because it's like an absolute plague in your garden. I mean, squash is like one of the most beloved and hated plants out there. And it's, they don't just keep producing over and over and over. They do have a life cycle, and once they complete that life cycle, that's it. And so when we leave that plant in the ground, we're fostering, you may want to have a pollinator garden, but at this point you have a pest and disease garden because you're just fostering places for these pests to continue to grow and thrive, because this is the time and when they really will latch on. The plants, I don't want to say sick because you may not have made it sick, but it's dying. It's done producing, and then it's just going to latch onto it, and then it gets out of control really fast.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had an extra space next to my collard greens that I had under cover. So I extended my cover a little bit, about 2 feet. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm going, because remember, I'm planting my collards kind of last month, right? And they are in the garden longer than a lot of y'all will have greens in your collard greens in your garden. But I'll flip it where it could be applicable to all of us. So I was thinking about putting zucchini there, right? Check out the seeds in our shop. And so I said, I'm going to bite the bullet and hand pollinate. I know. Unheard of. But then I thought, in an attempt to avoid the squash vine borer, a little bastard as well. And so I thought to myself, zucchini, squash, it's so prone for powdery mildew. And I've actually had some type of mildew. I don't know if it was powdery mildew on my collard green plants. And I said, I'm taking a chance by putting that squash plant there. I mean, this is like thinking 2 steps ahead. So the flip of it, if it were you in your garden and you're planting your squash, and then you're also considering what are you going to put in for fall, do you want to put those greens in that space? You still got squash in there? Maybe not. Or better yet, how about you pull that plant that's probably done, that squash plant that's probably done, before you put in something that could be susceptible for fall to the disease that you expect to see for the zucchini plant or the yellow squash or whatever have you. I've been known to overthink a thing or 3 or 13. Yeah.
Not you.
But some of these things, especially when it's staring you in your face, some of these things are important. So maybe you don't plan as far as, hey, what I'm going to plant next to each other in that vein. But when you're looking at a plant that has some type of mildew, I mean, call it. It's time of death, Yeah. I mean, have you ever beat powdery mildew?
That's a hard question. I don't know. I've definitely kept it at bay. If I've caught it, or yes, I have beat it. I'll take that back. I have beat it, but I had to catch it really early, and I had to prune the plant very heavily. And essentially, what happened is I sacrificed a lot of my my harvest off of it. So I don't think it was worth it to fight it. Now, that being said, I wouldn't look at a plant and be like, I see powdery mildew, let me get it out of here now. I mean, if I come out there and I see a leaf, I'll pull the leaf. You know, I'll do a little bit of that for a while, but it does get to a point where it's like, no, I'm all set. I'm good. Let's move on to something better.
Yeah.
And then just kind of end it there. So, yeah, I've been able to beat it, but I don't know if it was worth the effort. But I mean, this is all part of it too. It's part of the, the experience in gardening and the learning process, you know. I don't recommend anybody ever just going and just randomly pulling a plant. Like I've got a tomato plant right now that's got leaf curl, and it's just, you know, all the other plants are twice as big as it. It needs to go, you know. So I'll go out there and I'll pull it, and I mean it's 1 out of 15 plants. So, I mean, what's the big deal? You know what I mean? Just go ahead and move on from it and call it a day. So, I mean, and that in the grand scheme of things, that's not the end of the world. But, and this is another reason why I always recommend planting more than one of something. You know, a lot of times I'll see, especially newer gardeners, they want to try a little bit of everything. And so they'll get one squash plant, one pepper plant, one, you know, tomato plant. And then they get the disease. And what you end up doing is you end up fighting to save that plant for so long. And, you know, it's just a hindrance to you in your garden, which is another argument for, and I just kind of thought of this, but what do you think about, like, if you were planting a garden and let's say you were like, look, I'm going to have a 4x8 bed, and go ahead and factor in an extra 25% for that. Say I want it a little bit bigger so I can do a little bit more just to be safe.
I think it depends on your space. Would I do that if I were limiting myself to only growing a handful of different types of things? Then yeah, you know. But if I'm trying to increase the types of vegetables and herbs and fruits and things that I'm growing, I don't know that I have the garden bandwidth to allow for that, for the extras.
Right. I mean, it's just a thought. I just kind of thought of that, and I was like, you know, I wish I would have done that. I don't know.
If it's something that you really, really enjoy, then, you know, I do a lot of unnatural things for my beloved collards, as well as my tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
I do more for them than I do for most everything else, and maybe my peppers as well, than everything else in my garden. So to that end, well, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, just one of those natural progressions in the garden where you start adding more. But, you know, I tried that for a long time with, for instance, corn. It's why I'm so many years into trying growing corn, because I was like, oh, I'll just grow a couple plants. You know, I don't really care about it. But then as you start reading, it's like, no, you got to grow a lot of corn so you get the pollination, this, that, and the other. So it's just kind of tricky. So it's just one of those things to think about as you move forward. And as far as, like, I don't want to stay on squash for too long because I personally hate it, growing it, but it's so beautiful to look at when it's actually doing well. But what I will say is I would not ever take that plant and then compost a squash plant either.
No.
Never, because disease and everything else is just too prevalent on that plant.
Yeah, let me say one more thing about squash, and before we wrap up, it's a space hog, you know. So when you think about that, and kind of put that next to, if you're struggling with the plant, if you've not gotten, you know, squash from it for many, many weeks and you've not seen it actually begin to produce, that's a contender for me just to be done with it. You know, I can get more out of that space, you know, presumably, with if I start something over. Yeah.
So in tomatoes, almost the same way. You know, if you have a determinate tomato, we said this before, but I do feel like we have to say it all the time, is when that tomato looks like it's done producing a determinate, it's done producing. Go ahead and pull it out. I mean, you'll get a couple tomatoes, but you're not going to get enough to worry about. Do you grow a lot of determinants?
I grow determinants a lot. No, I probably grow indeterminates more so. And
Yeah.
I've listened to you when it comes to your approach with kind of going back to going to indeterminates, then going back where you are now to really growing determinates. And I know that it's primarily for your weather, right, to combat your super hot and humid summers when, tomatoes get disease. But the reason why I probably don't is the varieties that I'm most interested in are indeterminate. But there is something to be said about determinate tomatoes in a shorter season. So for me, I get one shot at tomatoes, and it's curious around how much does an indeterminate plant really produce. When you think about like every time, if you leave it in and the freeze hits it, you have so many flower buds still on the plant. There's so many itty bitty tomatoes. Like it wants to produce more, but it just can't. Right. And instead I probably would have, what do we figure out? Like 1 to 1.5 months. Those plants, if they were determined, it could probably come out of the ground, come out of the garden. It's something to consider. I'm not putting it on a 3-year calendar yet, though.
No, not yet.
No.
No, yeah, because determinate. I mean, even tomatoes in general, though, as they can harvest or harbor a lot of disease on them as well. Mm-hmm. So you got to be really careful. And it's just one of those things where you leave it in there and then the rain comes, the disease gets into the soil and you could be harboring it. And I mean, I'm not trying to get overly scientific about it because it's kind of, it's almost in my mind a crapshoot about, do all diseases transfer via rain into the soil than live for the year? But I would rather not take that chance, especially if I'm not getting any harvest from it. Yeah,
I think it's using tomatoes, one of the epic summer plants. I think it's something to consider. I've looked at old videos and pictures, and once we get to the middle of September for sure, my tomato plants look terrible. Now, just because they look bad doesn't mean that they still aren't producing. But there's an argument to be made on how enjoyable that fruit is, that those tomatoes are at that point. Mm-hmm. It's this, and I've thought about this, and I may have even done this years past, like, it's time for all of my green tomato dishes, like when we get towards the end of the season. I think it's also a balance for me. What can I plant next? Right. That's key, because taking a plant out is 2 purposes. One, you could be saving yourself some trouble based on disease. And again, at some point it's going to come out of your garden. Go ahead and get it done. But primarily for me, it's what's next being planted afterwards. So if I'm not pulling my tomatoes soon enough to get something else in and growing, the question is, do you just let them live? The sickly life that they're living. And I use sickly loosely.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, because again, it looks bad doesn't mean that it's necessarily sick. I like to call it like a little bit tattered, It's beaten up a little bit, but it's still trucking along, right?
Yeah. I had, I remember before I really realized the life cycle of a determinate tomato, I remember it was July, and I got the leaf spot disease, the septoria leaf spot. And I remember freaking out and just being like, all right, I got to save this plant. And I got some treatment, and I treated it, and I treated it, and I treated it, and I trimmed it, and I treated it, and I trimmed it. And it just kept this going on and on. Mm-hmm. And I did get a hold of it. And, eventually what I had was basically a bare plant that was producing new foliage at the top. And then I would get a couple tomatoes. But at that point, and I mean, this kind of goes on with one of the previous episodes. I was getting, $5 tomatoes at that point. It just really wasn't worth it. Mm-hmm. And then I almost composted that plant when I was done, but I pulled myself back and said, no, I have treated this thing so many times. It is not worth it. And just had to move on. You know what I mean? And just kind of hang it up. So that's kind of where I sat with that. And another one is cucumbers. Mm-hmm. Cucumbers can, my goodness, you want to talk about powdery mildew susceptible plant. I have never in my life seen a plant more susceptible than, I take that back, squash. So, but those are ones too, like, And a number of things can happen to cucumbers, you know?
Yeah.
You don't harvest them fast enough. You get one that turns yellow, and it really and truly does slow that plant down, if not stop it from producing.
I've never signed on to that. I don't have anything that I can say exhibit A against that. I think I'm just in denial, because that's like, you stopped picking those and now your plant isn't producing anymore. And I think because we sometimes plant a few cucumbers, like mini cucumbers at the same time, it's hard to tell which one's still producing and which one isn't. So I'm not doubting it, but I am turning my head like, oh, does it have to? Does it really, really have to?
Yes, it does. I mean, it took me a while to believe it, but 2 years ago, I had a plant and it was producing, and lo and behold, at the bottom of the plant, there was a giant yellow cucumber, and then that plant produced no more after that, while the other ones were continuing to produce. So, you know, and that's just one of the things too. But as far as like leaving it in the garden, I mean, you're talking powdery mildew, you're talking, what's the other thing?
Downy.
I'm drawing a blank. Downy mildew, but I'm the pest wise, the cucumber beetle and the cucumber worm, or pickle worm, excuse me. Nightmare. You know what I mean? And so that pest will sit on that plant, lay those eggs, and then guess what you're going to get the next year?
Yep.
You know, and it's crazy to me how that works, isn't it? That it will go through a cold winter with no protection, well, what we think is no protection, and then come out in the end. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's the what did you grow there last year kind of thing. And how long was that plant last year in that space, right? Was it sick last year? And I think that this is, you know, when we go back to, oh, this really is complex, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and we're trying to, you know, what is it? How to eat an elephant one bite at a time. We're trying to take this, you know, bite by bite. But these are the things that, especially in the early part of the summer. So many of y'all already have your spring things out. For those that are blessed and highly favored like me that still have spring things, you know, cool weather crops growing, we are not absolved from this, right? You know, so exactly the same points. The vegetable is the vegetable is the vegetable, especially something that isn't really designed to grow in the season you're growing it in, right? You got to keep your eye out for those. And I, to be quite frank, am more likely to cut bait on those things. If I know I pushed the envelope and the thing isn't performing, you know, like I planted cucumbers super late, and guess what ends up happening? It's produced so very little, and it's looking sickly, you know. Eat something else crunchy in your salad, you know. Like,
yeah. Well, and you know, it's a hard concept, and I do feel everybody's pain with that, but the way I look at it is, you know, I'm sitting here today. I'm going to be harvesting my onions soon, and so it'll be the last week of May when I harvest my onions, because it's the last week and a half of May at the time of this recording, and it'll be empty in that spot. But then I've got to say, well, what can I put there next? Because that's the key to all of this, is there's always something else you can put in that space. You know, you can very well put something in that space in order to grow and have your garden for the next year. And thinking about it in that manner could really help, or for the rest of the season, not even the next year, the rest of that season. So where you could get one squash crop, watch your squash suffer, and then have empty plants that you're continuously trying to diagnose and fix, you could already have another plant in the ground growing and have it moving in the right direction, and then get another harvest. So you can really flip your beds very quickly.
Yeah, I think, truth moment is, it took me years to come to this place.
Yeah, me
right?
too.
You know, so even if you go back to earlier on, you said, you know, basically you thought things would produce forever, right? You know, and in my mind, forever was until the cold came, So everything that I planted in the summer is supposed to produce until the cold weather kills it, right? And we've since learned differently. But you also, despite your best efforts, sometimes you can end up with plants that don't produce what you expect. Maybe it's the variety. Maybe it is. You start reading. It always happens this way. You start looking at it like, oh, what's happening here? I've forgotten 4 of the thing. And you look online and reviews say, yeah, it's a slow producer. And it's like, or you have some sickness, whether it's inclement weather, whether it's your normal weather that you get every season, this could be something new. It could be any number of reasons as to why the plant isn't doing what you expect it to do. The whole point, though, is, are you ready to make the decision if it's not doing what you expect it to do? And after watching me not make the decision, which is a decision, in past years, I feel much more confident in saying, I know what it's not going to do, so let's move on, right? And there's some enjoyment, I think, also, kind of with that fresh start.
Yeah. Now, pumpkins, watermelons, melons in general, and pumpkins are all fall into this category as well. I have to be totally honest. I don't know how long a watermelon or a pumpkin will continue to produce on a plant, but that's because I usually get pests or diseases in the meantime and I have to pull the plant. So I don't know the correct answer to that. That's a shame on me. I should know that, but I don't. But it's one of those things that you have to remember as we do this is you go through it. It's like I said, you start seeing the disease. You got to make that decision to pull it. And go ahead.
That's harder because the melon needs to, at least a watermelon needs to ripen on the vine, right? Yep. A cantaloupe as a melon will get, which I think it's technically something different. It will continue to ripen once you've actually picked it. There are a couple that are in each column. And so when you look at it, whatever, for me in my growing season, whatever, by the time we get to like August, September-ish, whatever for melons have produced, there's no additional round of melons that's coming. So I can look at what the plant has produced and say, do I want to try to leave this plant here long enough for this thing to ripen? And that's, I actually made a note, which I'll come back to in a moment, but that's the thing that I need to pay more attention to, because that absolutely the weather, meaning specifically how warm it is, will dictate how long it takes for that melon to ripen. And that's super hard, right? Especially for me, because it's all about me in this moment, especially for me when it comes to if I'm later in the season. If I'm at the beginning of August and melons are looking good, then I'm all good in the hood, But if I'm in September and I'm hoping and praying something's going to get to the point of actually being edible from a melon perspective, you could basically wrap it up. But it's still hard for me. I'm still in the early stages of, admitting that. And I'm still, I guess I'm in the later stages of denial for that.
Well, I'm glad you said something about that because you are exactly right. The time that it takes for the melon to ripen is important because, you can't really ripen it off the vine. It doesn't really work out very well. It will continue to ripen, but it won't go from unripe to ripe before it rots. And what that means to me, and it triggered me to remember this, is usually when I pull it, there are immature melons on the plant when I have to pull it. And there's just no way, you get a peanut sized melon on there and it's late August, you're just not going to get it. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're not going to get that. So, it's one of those things where it's go ahead and get it out. But let's talk about the time frame in between. So you pull that melon and, it's different for everybody. Where I am in coastal North Carolina, it can be really hot in August. And if I go to pull the melon, I don't have it anymore. What can I do in that time frame for the next season? Can I get something in the ground for this current season we're in, or should I go ahead and plant for the next season, or should I let the garden just sit there and be empty? And this goes for all of these plants. It's not just melons, but melons and pumpkins are a good one. But across the board, it's well, at what point do you decide, let me go to the next season or whatever.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I feel like your notes will help you with tremendously. So typically for me, if I'm pulling a plant in the summer, I'm moving on to the next season, right? Unless it's super early. Like if the plant is actually produced and I'm pulling it, typically I'm moving on to the next season, or at least I should be, right? I think that obviously the calculations, the math is the same. How much time do you have left in your growing season? And then what's the optimal time needed? Underline the word optimal time needed for what you're considering putting in its place. You know,
right.
And that could be whether it's summer plantings or fall plantings. Do you have the optimal time needed for insert the next summer plant for your, bush beans to actually produce?
Right.
If you don't, let's look towards something for fall, because in this case, you have, in most cases, a longer runway. Now, that doesn't mean everything that's cool weather like is going to be able to produce in your garden. It still goes back to what's the optimal time for that cabbage? What's the optimal time for your fall broccoli? Are you in that period of time, if we're looking at summer, is it too hot to plant the thing that you want? Right? So all of those considerations are the considerations.
Right. And I mean, that's where, and as much as I hate them, this, the days to harvest really come into account. So you can look at something and say, like, what are the days to harvest on it? And typically, and I do have key plants that I will put in the ground for that will meet those requirements. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned one of them, bush beans, radishes, any kind of bush bean plant. I've done soybeans. I've done that before. Can you think of anything else that's like really quick to produce?
If you're later in the season and maybe you have cooler weather, so not yours, but mine, lettuce, any kind of leafy green. I've actually put basil in and transplants in at the end of August, beginning of September. And it was lovely, as summer wrapped up going into fall.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is in the later summer, as things start to cool, you're starting to get into another really good period where plants will grow very strongly, mm-hmm. but for a limited period of time, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. so you can pick them accordingly. So, you can decide that. And then a lot of times what I've gotten to where I'll do is I'll just let the bed sit for a month if I have to, and just, no harm, no foul. But for the squash, nobody's stopping you from pulling that plant and putting another squash seed in the ground. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can always turn around and resow it. If
you could do it hard stop. Now, if it's going to produce, it goes back to that optimal period. There's also the consideration of what you plan on overwintering, right? So I'm always thinking about where am I going to plant my garlic for next year? Yep. So is this a good space? So in that case, I would leave that space bare or dormant, I should say, because it's going to make room for me to be able to plant my garlic, most ideally in November, but more likely for me in December. Because guess what, guys and gals? I'm a little bit later than I expected to be planting. But we're not going to talk about that.
Nope. But that's your MO. Mm-hmm. That's just how you roll.
But I'm surprised every time.
I'm not. It's
almost like there's almost a level of delusion around it.
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely is. So, I mean, it's interesting when you think about it. And I mean, I've seen it, and like I said, the only reason why I feel free to talk about it is because I've done it so many times. I mean, I've held on to the squash plant that's literally chewed in half because of the squash vine borer and is wilting every single day, and left it in the garden and be like, no, I can bring it back. I can bring this plant back. And it's just it never, ever, ever worked. Mm-hmm. And you know what I did the next year? I did the same thing. And I did the same thing after that. But now it's getting to the point to where I will take it and I'll say, you know what? Screw it. I'm done. And last year was the first year. I mean, I was just looking at my garden. Within the next 2 weeks, 50% of it's going to be empty. Mm-hmm. Isn't that crazy? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like I was looking at it, I was like, man, this is wild. But I'm also have plans to replant it right away. and get it going again. So it's like, yeah, it'll be empty, but it's not going to be empty for long. Yeah. And, you know, right now I've got 4 beds out of 11 that don't really have anything going on. I've got 2 of them that are planted, but you can't even tell they're planted. You know what I mean? You can't even see the seeds haven't really germinated yet in one, and the sweet potatoes are just starting to kind of green up after being transplanted. So it's like, it's this weird thing where you've got going on where it's like, you don't have to have that garden filled for the whole season, because once it starts growing, you blink and then it's filled up again. You know what I mean? It just, it really doesn't take that long. And so while you work, you can focus on other garden beds while this one is growing or doing its thing, and kind of, it helps manage a bigger size garden, in my opinion, as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the thing that's underlined in all of this is like the plan that you have, the plan that, you know, that you're making adjustments to. So, you know, truth be told, I have a loose plan, you know, maybe 60% when it comes to what is going to go into my fall garden. And a lot of it has to do with what we're talking about now, right? So when am I pulling plants? And I know that we talked about before how I've gone from never pulling a plant to pulling plants to you saying, what do you mean you're pulling plants that still are producing, you know? And so a good example of that are plants that are producing, but I'm fighting pests with, you know? So my summer kale is such a great example. And I know that that's not a good example for most, but that's okay. Insert whatever the plant is for you. I get a lot of aphids, and I mean, it's just nasty business. And I look at it to say, I'm not even going to eat this stuff. Right? Let's get the plant out of there. That's what I want to do. Now, I'm not saying I'm doing it all the time, but that's what I really want to do. And even once you get to the point of the weather cooling off and getting to, it really prefers this type of weather, you don't want those leaves that have been gnawed on for the last 4 weeks anyway. No. So, I mean, I think that when I say it's maybe 60%, that is with a loose understanding of when things are going to be completed that are in my summer garden, and I can move on to the next season. What I'll be doing this year is making notes to refine it. I've been looking down all of this time. I know you've noticed, because I'm on the quest to find out, and I'm not going to, you know, crawl back up this funnel, but I'm on the quest to find out when the one Roma plant that I had that really produced last year stopped producing. I'm at August 25th, and I have a shirt full of ripe Roma tomatoes. So that's one of my determinate plants. And so I'm trying to find out what happened after August 25th. You know, what was it really producing? You know, right. So in a perfect world, that'd be a great time to say, all right, that plant's done, and then move on to planting something for fall, because that's a real sweet spot for me. Enough time optimally to grow other things. But now, you know, I'm teetering on this. Well, how many did I get the first week of September? That's the dance you're going to be doing.
Yeah, and I mean,
healthy in August.
Yeah, the plant's healthy. It starts to finish out. It's calling it good, and then you go into the next season, and it's like you've wasted time waiting for 1 or 2. I mean, let's call it what it is. 10 Roma tomatoes, which in the grand scheme of things, 10 Roma tomatoes is absolutely nothing. And you could have had a whole bed of lettuce in.
Yep.
You could have had a whole bed of cabbage started. You could have had all these things. Go ahead.
I'll try to. You're preaching out here. I'm trying to give you the backup bell.
and the thing that you have to remember as well is when I look at my garden, I look at it from a financial perspective of how much money am I saving? Is it profitable? Meaning not am I bringing in money, but am I making more than I paid for the seeds, the effort put in, and then the amount that I could spend at the grocery store? And then I look at those two things and I say, well, 10 Roma tomatoes is worth like $5, $7, $8, something like that. But the 20 cabbage plants I could have in there is worth, $100. So it's like you're losing out in the long run. That's how I look at my garden personally. And so I just try to keep that in mind as I go through it and say, no, pull this out, get it out of there, move on to the next thing. Don't be afraid to let it sit there and be quiet and not grow. Don't be afraid of that. Not grow, meaning not having anything in there. And remember, we did an episode on cover crops. You can always do cover crops to improve your soil. And if you want to help your pollinators, you can figure out a way to do that too through that. And it doesn't have to have a long grow time depending on what you grow. It could be a short season for it.
Yeah. So I think that if you're new to this, or if you're thinking about expanding next year, or there's some crops where you're unsure about, if you have some type of farmer's market near you, the telltale about what's done and when it's done is on the farmer's market's tables. There's going to be a time in, for sure for Chicago, late September, early October, where the tomatoes are very scarce. The beans have been done for a week or two, right? That's letting you know for these larger growers that they are no longer getting that produce from their plants, right? So that's if you don't have any history with these plants within your own garden, make a note of that date. And then when you plant them next year, compare it to what you're planting. That's earlier on in our growing season. You mentioned you're picking a crop that you're going to really kind of fine tune and dig deep on and learn more about. And that was corn for you. Yeah. And for me, it's not a single crop per se, but it has been the timing around a bunch of different plants, right? So I sowed carrots back here in the spring, and they came up in May in 7 days, right? So like never before.
That's called perfect timing.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing is my note is going to say day I sowed and then day that they germinated. And that's important, not that it's just 7 days, but the conditions in those 7 days in that time of month. If I did it in April, it may not have been the same thing. If I did it in June, probably not at all, right? By the time it gets much more hot. So the thing that I'm challenging myself to do is, maybe it is a single crop. Maybe it's tomatoes, for me to really make notes on when tomatoes were at their prime and then when they started dwindling down. And because I'm only growing a little bit over a handful of tomato plants, to your point, there's not a lot of production. There's not like I'm pulling off 100 pounds of tomatoes at the end. That's not what's happening. So I'm looking and seeing there's a period of time where there are few tomatoes on the plant, but the plants look good. But here's the key. There are a few tomatoes on the plant. Remember last year, September 1st, tomato flower, that tomato didn't get to full size by the time we got to the frost. 2 months later, right?
Well, it's good that you mentioned that because the question of the day is about tomato flowers. Mm-hmm. And on that note, everybody, we're going to transition over. But first, I need to tell you about Backyard Garden Seeds. So check us out on Etsy. Right now, we have them on Etsy. We may move them somewhere else, but for right now and for the foreseeable future, they will be there. We have all kinds of seeds on there. The seeds are direct sowable that we have, but we are adding fall seeds very soon. To be honest, we're kind of waiting for our gardens to slow down so we can get to packaging them up for you. But there will be fall seeds added, and if those sell well, then we will very quickly get your seed desires in for your next year's garden. So please check us out. Everything, the link is below, and the Planter app is below as well. And remember, that is a great app that we live by, and that will help you with this issue as far as planning. So you can put in there that, hey, if my squash comes out at a certain time, this is going to come in behind it. It's drag and drop. It's really good. It's on the Google and Apple Play Store. It's the Planter app, and there is a link below that will get you a discount. So go through that link to get it so you can get the discount, because there is no code. There is no do-overs. Go through the link below to get that discount, and it will help you and enjoy it.
thank you all for the reviews on both the Planter app as well as the positive reviews on the Seed Shop. And a future thank you to those that will leave great reviews for us.
Yeah. And from the Backyard Gardens Community Garden on Facebook, which you are more than welcome to join for free. But you can also support us through other avenues. Link below. Matt writes...
Hey, Matt. Matt is one of my favorite guy names, by the way.
Is it?
I don't know if I know. Every Matt that I've ever known has been like a really, 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 really good guy.
Oh, not me, but this Matt seems very nice. So, hi, Matt.
I'm going to include this Matt before you even get the question. Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on. Maybe I reserve the right to change my mind once I hear the question.
It says, I have heard that Batavia smells funny. No, I'm joking. It does not say. It says, he wants to know when to stop pinching early tomato and pepper flowers. I planted early, as you can tell by my previous post. All of my plants are very well established and went in the ground basically a foot tall tomatoes and 8 to 9 inch tall peppers. They were in and growing at least 2 weeks prior to previous years. All that being said, do you think I should pinch off the buds at this point or let them ride? I'm an experienced gardener, far from professional, but I have never had plants fruiting this early in the season. I'm in northern New Jersey. Whatever zone you want to choose. Shaka. And then Sheridan writes, I've been wondering the same thing this week. Well, Matt and Sheridan, we're going to help you out.
Hey, Sheridan. And because Matt said, whatever zone you want to choose, he is in my group of Matts, the ones that I know and love officially.
It's too easy. It's too easy. Do you pull flowers?
I do. And I have advised some new gardeners to do the same. These are plants that have come out of their little pot and into the garden that have flowers on them. Pull them. Maybe I do it unconsciously once something is planted and it's growing. So I've never really thought about, okay, I've stopped pulling them now. Right? I don't know. I just, are you pulling flowers? I know you are.
I've never pulled a tomato flower.
Really?
Yeah, I've never pulled a tomato flower. I don't know why. I just don't see. I'm trying to think. Yeah, well, because I'm growing determinants, I don't really want to stop anything. My theory is minimal disturbance as possible. But for peppers, I absolutely do pull pepper flowers. If they're flowering inside, I pull them. If and when I plant them, I pull them. Generally, there's buds at minimum when you plant a pepper seed or a transplant. But then I will pull the first set of flowers, and then that's it. I don't pull anymore. I just let it ride. You know what I mean? And you'll go from there. So I've never really continued to pull pepper flowers. It does hurt my heart to pull them because I know what comes after a flower. But I do honestly believe that after I pull a pepper flower, I end up getting more peppers that year. So
well, I mean, I think so. The thought is, instead of putting energy into producing a pepper that the plant itself can't sustain, instead of putting energy into producing a tomato that at insert this stage the plant can't sustain, you pull the flower and let the root system continue to develop, let the plant get some height and girth to it, right? And in turn, you will have a much more desirable harvest compared to the itty bitty pepper that you're going to say sometimes even shrivels up. I've seen that happen even in the stores, right? Like you have stores and plants in starter pots with peppers on them. I mean, I guess if that's what you really want. So when I was listening to the question, I was thinking like waist high is what I pay attention like for a tomato plant. Once it's waist high for me, there's no going in and pulling flowers, but I just don't know if I'm actively pulling them before then though.
Yeah, I've never pulled, and I'll tell you why I've never pulled a tomato flower. Because when you plant the tomato, it has the ability to grow more roots up the stem. Because, the theory is you pull the flower, it the plant responds to there being no flower and say, well, hey, I need to use this energy. Let's produce more roots. But the tomato doesn't really need that. So that's why I've never pulled a tomato flower. And I've tried this with just about every plant I grow. I've tried planting them deeper, all of them, not as deep as you would tomatoes, but just a little bit deeper to see if you can get more roots. And some I have found do grow roots and some I have found don't. And peppers absolutely do not grow more roots. I have not had them rot because of it, which has always been the fear, but I have not had any kind of extra root growth. Therefore, I've just always left it and said, you know what? We're just going to move on. And it, or I've always, once I plant them, pull that first buds off and then I just leave them. And it tells the plant, put more roots in. And in that time frame, it'll spread the roots out and then you'll get more. And that's just kind of, and there's a debate and there's a question on here that we're going to have to talk about eventually about trimming or topping pepper plants. So that's a hot topic as well.
Yeah, there's let me just drop this note moment. So I've not done a side-by-side for trimming or topping plants off or versus not topping plants off. Anytime I see anything about it online, it definitely promotes the topping of plants. Are we just adding additional steps becomes my question. Right.
Depends how much you want to put into, but we'll get to that another time. Let's not trip. We want to focus. We want to give Matt his day with his question.
Yeah, Matt has led me to pay close attention since we're monitoring all things tomatoes this year. It's not going to help you right now, Matt. I'm thinking like if it's already planted and established, if it is already 2 feet tall, I'm just going to throw it out there. Then stop picking them. Right? If it's taller than that, absolutely stop picking them, let it do its thing. But I shall commit to monitoring my my tomato plants this year to see if I am coming in contact with a bunch of flowers.
Yeah, and you can, and Matt, you can choose who you want to listen to, but I do not recommend pulling tomato flowers and peppers right after planting. At planting, the first set, be done. And that's that. I think, a lot of these things, it's not like who's right and who's wrong. It's what are you comfortable with? What do you want to do? I think that's what it really comes down to for a lot of these things. Do you...
I feel like I'm uncertain, but I still feel right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's fair. I think a part of what we do here is sometimes they're opposing opinions, right? Because right now, this is an opinion. There's no fact behind either, right? Your pepper experience is pretty interesting, though. I think that's more factual when it comes to not producing roots. But for the tomato plant,
it's a known fact about tomato plants. You know what I mean? You plant them deeper, they grow roots. That's just how it is. And hell, they even grow roots if it's like mulch around them, and you see all kinds of stuff come out of them. So it's interesting. Leonard just sent me a note, though. He wanted me to tell you my story. So I went out, I had a potato bed that was looking really bad. And I kind of been watching it, right? And I was like, what's going on with it? Why is it not growing? No disease. I thought it wasn't getting water. It was getting water. I thought it wasn't getting fed. It had been fed. I had fed it. Nothing changed. Plants all died back like super early. My other tomato bed's doing great, right? It's starting to dwindle down, but this one was planted after the other potato bed. So I went out there and I was actually going to do a video. And I had prepared myself to go on, the walk of shame on YouTube and be like, hey, I planted this garden and nothing came out of it. And so I was like, well, let's look at this one plant. I stuck my finger in the ground, started pulling out potatoes, right? I had totally given up on this bed completely. And the moral of the story is I wanted to mess with it, but I couldn't find anything to do, so I just let it ride. And in the grand scheme of things, I was pleasantly surprised about what came out of the bed. It was really interesting. I don't know the weight of it. I definitely don't think I beat the grocery store prices, but I definitely made my money back on the potatoes that I put in. But I was really kind of bummed out. And then I start digging. I dig up the whole bed, man, and I got a rack of potatoes. So it's just really interesting.
Were they smaller than what you were expecting? The actual
No,
individual
they were
size?
bigger than what I wasn't expecting anything.
Well,
I literally expected to get zilch.
When you planned to plant them, or for that particular variety, are they the size you expect, or are they smaller?
Yeah, they were about the size I expect.
That definitely is a life lesson.
Yeah, so it was really interesting, you know. So when it's down, especially with root crops, when you think you're down and out, you might not be. So just hang strong, have some faith sometimes. But I left them in the ground, and it pertains to this because I didn't see any other indication that anything was occurring. So what do you do?
Yeah, are you going to do a video on that?
I filmed it today when you were calling me.
Okay. Over
and over and over.
As I do every time I call you. Do you have any? Are you? I'm curious about like the thing that would be super helpful for me. Because obviously you didn't do the video for me, but this is I thought this was done, and here's the picture of it. But guess what? You know, I think that's the part that it's a good reminder, and I file it away for if I encounter something that looks similar to that. Maybe hold on. You know.
I literally showed the bed. Like I started the video out. I mean, you guys should go watch it. And I was like, look, here's my bed. It's empty. Like this sucks. And this is really hard to do on YouTube. And I was like, look, we'll go look at this plant. And I stuck my finger in the ground. I was like, there's a potato. And so then I had to turn around and be like, all right, well, next time I'll come back in a minute. Let me harvest them and see what we got. And so it's like, you see this garden bed that's bare.
Yeah.
But underneath had potatoes.
So all of the potatoes had died back.
All the plants had died back completely to the ground. Yeah. Zero plants except for weeds at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, that happened to me last year in one of the backyard garden beds. And I was intentionally letting them die back. But then it was kind of like, wait, hold on. Right? Yeah. Like, you know, did something come in and start eating away? I actually did a short video, and someone said something like, you know, I thought they grew, like, where are the plants themselves? Because I'm basically digging in dirt to pull potatoes out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's just, it's one of the things about growing root crops, man. Yeah. If you've never grown a root crop, you need to grow one. Because it's just every single year I'm surprised and shocked by what comes out of it. I might be good surprised, I might be bad surprised. You know, I've had really good plants produce nothing. And I've had really bad plants produce something. I'm not sitting here trying to say like it was this crazy harvest, but it was a heck of a lot more than I had anticipated.
Yeah.
So, and on that note, everybody, please check out the seed shop, check out Planter App, become a subscriber, help us out. You can hear all the creaking. We need to upgrade our equipment, so help us. And everybody, have a great, fantastic day, and come see us next Thursday. But we know we're going to do one thing when we come here, and that's going to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.